Hello. Maybe a comparison of the judicial system to a business venture is not exactly justified, but it might be a good metaphor to decide if you really want to go into litigation or not. Of course, we're talking about civil justice system because when it comes to criminal, the stakes are higher and different, and it's about freedom and penalizing and stigmatizing your life. So there, the considerations, the deliberation will be different. But civil justice mostly, not always, but mostly, is dealing with the simple question like who will be paying what to whom. So mostly, again, not always, but mostly it's about money, either altogether or at least to a significant extent. Because even in family cases, which occupy like up to 70% of the court's caseload, even there, despite of all the pretenses of the parties, very often, as we all know, it's about who will be paying to whom and how much, how the property will be split. Again, not only that, of course, not only that, but to a significant extent, it's about that. When it comes to estate law about successions, again, who will receive what to what extent? Who will be paying what to what extent? Even in the cases of protection mandate and in cases of incapacity of a minor or elderly person, but for clear questions about the civil rights, about the protection of the person, there is almost always a question of some property, some money, who will be administering it, who will be responsible to whom, to what extent again, how, uh, and if the person will be remunerated, and so forth. Of course, when it comes to civil responsibility, just who is responsible, what will be the damages to pay, defamation. When it comes to real estate, again, not always, but mostly. If there is a problem, how much does it cost to rectify it, and who will be paying, and so forth and so forth. And in such a context, thinking of going into a lawsuit as of an investment of sorts, a risky investment, but still, it might be possible and a little bit justified, at least at that point where you decide if you are going there or not. Similarly to a business venture, a business investment project, there are questions to find an answer before you go. First of all, of course, you have to calculate, like, what are you going to get, financially speaking, like in monetary terms, if you win. What will be you losing in the same terms, similar terms, if you do not win in court, if the judge takes a different approach? Of course, there are situations when the judge might be balancing the rights and obligations and give something to someone, something to another. Both usually end up not satisfied, but at least it's a balanced decision. But there are situations, for example, if you want to disinherit one of the heirs, or if you want to displace, remove from the office some administrator, and so forth and so forth. When the question is like either or, and you might win it all, but you might lose it all, together with the expenses and investment. So, of course, there should be a clear understanding of what kind of investment is needed. And the big part of it is the amount that you'll be paying your lawyer, but also the amount you'll be paying experts, inspectors, if anything, bailiffs, couriers, maybe social workers if needed, of course, court fees, stenographers, and so forth. And very often it's about transportation because you can or sometimes you must fly back and forth from another country, for example, or from another city, or even just come from a distant home where you are to the courthouse and back, and so just accommodate yourself, maybe a hotel. There might be many situations to think of. And it's also important to remember that when it comes to litigation, when you think of the amount that you will be probably spending, it's a good idea to double that because in reality, it's usually costlier than we have a tendency to think and that we predict because there is always the other party and their actions and maybe something that you were not going into, but they dragged you into, like some expertise or some pretrial examination, uh, some psychosocial evaluation, and so forth. Maybe bring in some witnesses or some evidence, which might be again costly, and so forth, so forth. So when you calculate your investment, just go with a pessimistic estimate. Usually it's closer to the reality. The tricky part is to assess your chances to succeed. Because usually a regular person who is not experienced, fortunately, probably in a legal process, who is not in courtroom like often with one litigation or another, such a normal, regular person has a tendency to think that if something is fair, that if something is like fairly suspicious, that if something has a reasonable and commonsensical explanation, that would be enough, and that's the good way to succeed. But in fact, the evidence is complicated, procedure is complicated. Most often we face the situations when nothing, or at least something, is not going the way as it was foreseen or expected or predicted or envisaged. So it might be a good idea to take your time, or maybe to get your lawyer a limited mandate to do some legal research, in the sense that to just find out similar cases with similar facts and see where the judges go with those facts. And even if at the end you think that it's all unfair, incorrect, many people think this way, still, if this is the way the court normally goes, chances are that the court will go same way in your case as well, because your case won't be that much special to the court as you might think before. So it's a good idea. Though again, there are exceptions, of course. We all know that sometimes suddenly the case that was decided along the like regular expectations and guidelines and rules suddenly goes to the Court of Appeal, or sometimes even to the Supreme Court, and the honorable judges of the Court of Appeal or Supreme Court suddenly decide to correct the way it will be going further on. And therefore, suddenly your case becomes a leading case for some new rule or some corrected rule for the future. But that happens not that much often, though it can happen. It can, of course. Once you have all those questions answered in the same way as any other business project, we're still within this metaphor. You might be thinking of a best alternative. Like, okay, if you're already going, or at least facing a perspective, to invest this amount of money, if you have these levels of risk of a failure, if you are thinking or more or less ready that you'll be losing in case of a failure, like this amount of money, add into that the costs, the investment. Maybe for that amount of money, you can get what you wanted uh, in another way, a non-judicial way, be it a negotiation, starting another business, just letting it all go, um, compensating yourself with something else or using something else, some other specialist even. Because again, is it unfair? Maybe, but it might be at the same time a better business decision or not. And if after answering all those questions, you're sure that you're rationally calculated and you're ready to go into this uh, venture and that you're ready to take risks and that your estimate of this risk is covered by a possible prize at the end, then yes, of course, as long as you have rights, uh, you can go to the court and ask the court to rectify the situation judicially. But if you haven't asked yourself these questions, and if you haven't found good answers using sometimes a lawyer, sometimes an accountant, sometimes a notary, sometimes using your own research skills, because nowadays a lot of information is there online. Uh, if you haven't got those answers yet, then it's not a good time yet to decide if you're going for a civil litigation. You might still first prefer to proceed with these questions. Thank you, and have a nice day.